This is the Business Storytelling Show, a top global marketing podcast listened to in more than 100 countries, live streamed on social media, and broadcast on DBTV. Christoph Trapp chats with industry leaders to help your company tell better business stories. Here's today's episode.
Hey, business storytellers. How's everyone doing? Episode 664 on deck here. We're going to talk about SEO today and the cognitive bias. I'm talking to Sarah Presch. You can check her out on sarahpresch.com. We'll throw that up on the bottom there throughout the show. But she is a public speaker who combines the fascinating worlds of psychology and search. And that's super interesting to me because certainly it affects, whatever people's biases are, it affects how they search, what they find, how you show up, etc., etc. I'm not the expert at it, so that's why I asked Sarah to come on the show and fill us in. Let's get her on and let's find out. Sarah, welcome.
Hey.
So nice to see you. Really appreciate you coming on. And certainly I ran across you somewhere on the internet talking about this very important topic. Now, maybe just kind of to set the foundation, because I also had to think about it and actually use Perplexity AI to give me some background. But now I'm talking to the expert. Cognitive bias. I mean, give us like a high level. What is that and what are the different pieces of it?
Yeah, sure. So to put it simply, cognitive biases are errors in thinking that we have as people. Everybody's biased. As much as we'd like to think that no, I'm not biased, unfortunately, we all are. And that's because of the way that we think. Um, as people, we're not very good at making, long, rational decisions. So what we do is we take mental shortcuts to try and help us, make decisions quicker. And while these work really well for kind of everyday decisions, for example, things like what should I have for dinner? Should I cross the road right now? Should I print this piece of paper out? Should I read this book? That sort of thing. Because they're not, well thought out decisions that we're making, they're prone to biases, and that's how these cognitive biases come into play. There are hundreds of them, so I can't possibly go into detail in, however much time that we have today. But hopefully that gives you an idea.
Yeah, dude, let's not go into hundreds, but let's give maybe a couple. Like what are a couple of examples when we think about a cognitive bias that would actually affect how people search?
Yeah, I think the main one that I'd probably like to talk about is probably confirmation bias, as that one really does impact the way that, we search for things online. And it's actually quite scary, some of the, impacts that it has. So confirmation bias is basically the human tendency to kind of think out or, search for and remember information which already confirms our existing beliefs. So when we're looking for information, we're actually not looking for facts and evidence as much as we like to think that we are. We're looking for information that kind of confirms our existing beliefs, and we will only believe evidence that only slightly kind of diverges from the beliefs that we have. Everything else we tend to ignore.
So, from a culture perspective, I would argue, oh my God, confirmation bias is the most annoying thing ever in the world because, right? I mean, nobody can ever change their mind on anything. But let's not go down that rabbit hole and talk about content and SEO and whatever. And you certainly see a lot of these searches, right? Like, is this really a good thing, right? I mean, that's certainly somebody searching with they already know the answer they want, probably no, but so how do you, as you're trying to confirm things, first of all, how do you know what your target audience is thinking? Like, what is the confirmation bias that you as a brand need to confirm, if that makes sense?
That one's really hard because you kind of can't really, there's no real like scientific way to get inside somebody's brain and find out, what they're looking for or what they want to, search for. It's more of a way that you can kind of interpret the way that they search for things. So for example, if they're, for example, this is one of the examples that I gave in my Brighton SEO talk, is when people search for things like link between coffee and hypertension. because they're looking for the link between coffee and hypertension, they're looking for information that confirms the belief that there is a link between that, if that makes sense. If, for example, they were searching for no link between coffee and hypertension, therefore they'd be looking for information that confirms their belief that there is no link between it. So it's just kind of getting used to the way that, keywords and searches are phrased. But again, it's quite difficult and it takes a lot of practice.
It's kind of interesting you mentioned the hypertension thing because, um, there's some people I know, like, I mean, not, I mean, my wife doesn't do this at all, but I know there's people who are like, well, you got to drink less monsters, you got to drink less coffee. And then they search, or let's stay with the business example. There's people who are like, oh, this is not how you do it. That's how you do it. So they only find the article that talks about how they would do it, right? But then they're going
Yep.
to ignore all these other articles or other research or whatever you want to call it that actually gives the other side of the coin.
Oh, that is 100% true. And that was basically what I was showed as well in my Brighton SEO talk recently. Because the way that people search is impacted by confirmation bias, because the way that people kind of go to a search engine, type in the keywords, and then select the information that they want to look at, that all comes down to kind of their personal goals and values. Like you were saying, somebody looking for, I believe it's done this way, and I'm going to do it this way. And what people will do is they will actually, explore. They won't be looking for new information, but they will look for information that confirms their existing beliefs. And that will kind of, determine which websites they explore. And also, when it comes to kind of evaluating the information and making decisions based on that information, they're not very motivated to kind of, critically verify if the information is correct online. As long as it confirms their belief, they'll take it and be like, yes, okay, this makes me feel good.
This is what I have to do. And so let's kind of shift a little bit when it comes to how do we create content? How do we create marketing messages around that confirmation bias? And that is, thanks for mentioning it a couple times. That is, I think, where I saw your name pop up when I was looking at the agenda for Brighton SEO. And hopefully, one of these days I'll go there. It's a little bit out of the way from me in the middle of the country in the United States, in the middle of nowhere. Wouldn't want it any other way, quite frankly. But certainly, that can be hard to get out there. But how do you, so once you know what people search for, so let's maybe stick with the example of hypertension and monsters, and not to pick on monsters. I got a monster right here, actually, or coffee or whatever. How do you, as a company, like maybe let's pick a company that sells something in that space, how do you create content in an ethical way around a confirmation bias without, I mean, everybody tries to manipulate people to an extent, or influence. Maybe influence is a better term. But how do you stay on the influence side and not go over to the manipulation or unethical side?
I'm happy that you mentioned ethics, because I think this is something where it's really, really important that you kind of do things right and you don't create content for the sake of creating content just to kind of manipulate people. Because when you start creating content just to kind of, manipulate people or do things for the wrong way, this is where things can get really bad. And this is where misinformation becomes, spread quite a lot online. So, what I would say is, whenever anybody's creating content, or say you're a business or you're a digital marketing agency and you have a client in a particular space who wants you to create content for something, what you have to do is 100% make sure that you fact check it. Make sure that, it's 100% accurate, so that you can't be accused of, spreading misinformation on a particular thing just to, sell your product. And I think as well, it's really, really important as well that you use qualified writers to do it. There's quite a lot of examples, especially in the medical space, where, people, well, not just in the medical space, actually, just like in general with the SERPs. So when companies create content, they go and take a look at what's in the SERPs already. and then just go and kind of copy that without making sure that it's correct, it's ethical, it's relevant, and also making sure that you're using qualified writers who actually know how to write content for that particular branch or area. So again, I mentioned medical just briefly. If you've got a client in the medical sphere, you need to make sure that you're using a writer who has experience writing on medical things. So like I could write blog posts about psychology, but if you're doing something about cardiology or something like that, I could not do that. I would not be able to write content on that. And also just, make sure that you are checking your sources and you are checking, that the information that you're relaying is correct.
Yeah, it's interesting. So my background, I'm going to throw up another URL here in a minute. But
Mm,
my background, I wouldn't call myself an expert at any particular thing other than getting the thing out of the experts, right? Like interviewing
yeah,
them, like kind of what we're doing here. The
yeah,
only thing I really know how to do is to ask you questions about a topic. And, my
mm,
questions are based on what are people actually asking about the topic? What do I not know about the topic, right?
yeah,
But I do believe the whole thing about being in an industry. So I'm going to throw this up here, growgetter.io. That's my day job at the bottom there, and we
mm,
work in the market research space, right? So that's kind of, we're not the experts necessarily in every topic in there, but we know the industry, right? So we can
mm,
write about that industry way easier. I mean, I would say so, than somebody who's never even worked in the industry, right? Because we know the
yeah,
terminology and those kind of things. Talking about terminology, and you know what? Terminology matters. I was in Nashville one time in an Uber, and the guy said he's a singer. And I said, so the right term is what? I don't remember what the right term is now. Like in business, you would say what vertical or what niche or what
mm,
genre. That's what you say in music, right? So it's like the same word for the same thing three times, but depending
mm,
what industry you're currently in or what area, it's a different word. So you have to learn how to speak the right language. Talking about speaking the right language, how does the confirmation bias? How does it affect? Let's talk about advertising maybe for half a second. We don't talk about that too much on here, but how does it affect how people view ads, and how does it affect it if they're on different sides of the issue?
yeah. So it basically kind of impacts everything. Anybody who's making a search, anybody who's human who is making a search, which I really hope that everybody who does use search engines are humans and it's not our pets doing it or something. um yeah, but basically anybody who's human suffers from confirmation bias. And so no matter what SERP you're looking at or what ad you're looking at, you're going to be prone to kind of confirming your belief because it gives you a sense of self-worth. People don't like information that makes them change their mind because it makes them feel uncomfortable, and people will go to great lengths to avoid these feelings of uncomfort. So when it comes to advertising, again, I think it's just important to remember that you can't target absolutely everybody. You have to make sure that you're targeting the people that you want to target, and you need to make sure again that you're doing this ethically to target the right people, because otherwise, again, as I keep mentioning, if you're just throwing things out to deal with confirmation bias and you want people to talk about it and you want people to share about it, even if it's not correct, then you're spreading misinformation, and then it's not a good look for your brand.
As you just said, you can't market to everybody, but the problem today is that even if you don't market to everybody, everybody's still potentially, I mean, unless you're running a very targeted paid ABM campaign or something, and you're only targeting people based on title at one company or something like that, there's always the chance that all kinds of people will see it, right? I mean, you see it on TikTok, for example. You do a TikTok for a specific audience, and then a completely different audience ends up seeing this. I actually had a TikTok, I don't want to say it went viral, but like I did it so long ago on First Amendment auditors or First Amendment auditors, depending how you look at that. I did the quotation marks there. We're not going to get into that topic right now, but is that part of the problem sometimes when there is negative feedback or a little bit of a backlash because your audience, the one you were actually after, they got it, they loved it, you hit their confirmation bias, and other people saw it, but they're not your audience, and they they reacted negatively. I mean, is that part of the reason why that happens, or is there you know what I'm talking about? What kind of case here?
Yeah, I wouldn't really say that it's kind of down to confirmation bias why people would react negatively. I think it's more down to kind of like people's different identities that they have. And again, this slightly plays into the cognitive biases, but it's more comes down to things like identity theory and things like that, where people naturally kind of form groups and they form their social identities. And what they do is they kind of, you know, put themselves into groups. So this is where you have things like dog people versus cat people, things like that. But again, it goes down to sports teams, it goes down to nationality. It can, anything can get people to form a type of group based on and base their identity off this kind of group belonging and stuff. So of course, when you're doing an advertisement that's targeted at one particular group, if people from a different group who might not see eye to eye, it's completely normal to have kind of, people compare themselves to the groups that they're in, and the groups are slightly different. So I think when it comes to kind of every type of advertising, especially on things like TikTok and stuff, you're always going to risk different people seeing your ads that maybe not might not be the target audience they're targeting at. But again, I don't build where we can target everything 100% towards the people that you want. And if there is some kind of backlash, maybe it's, a case of looking into why there was some sort of backlash. Was it offensive to people? Was it too geared up to a particular audience and not kind of, all inclusive? Because when it comes to ads, I think we should be trying to bring people together rather than getting people to be against each other and stuff like that. um so hopefully that helps a bit.
Yeah, very interesting. It's just interesting to think about where in all this stuff we have to do, at what point should people even think about the confirmation bias in their campaigns and their content? I mean, there's so much stuff. Does it need to be like next week we're talking, I think episode 665, talking with Vicky Ross about creative briefs. And I mean, should there literally be like a line in there saying, what bias are you after? Or like, how do you even make it part of your thought process?
I think it's just a case of, as a marketer, being aware that these biases exist. And as I said, there's loads of these different biases. So it's not just confirmation bias. But maybe I can give you an example kind of from my day-to-day work as a marketing director for a SaaS company. I work for a SEO technology company called Dragometrics. And basically, I kind of have to deal with this every day, and it's called availability bias. And how this works is basically people tend to make decisions based on information that they have readily available. And the information that they kind of tend to keep in mind is stuff that's, recent, it's frequent, it's things that they've heard about. So when it comes to marketing and stuff, our software is just as good as, like, the main competition, and we actually have some features that, are unique to us as opposed to the other ones. But because we're not so well heard of, people tend to go for the other softwares rather than considering us, because they have a bias, because they think that, because they've heard of the other companies, the software must be good. And because they haven't heard of us, it must mean that our software isn't as good, when that's not true. So that's something that, brand awareness, you have to work on things like that. And you have to make sure that you're always making a good impression, because people always remember, negative things that they hear about a brand, or extreme things that they hear about a brand. So again, that's just another example of one of the other cognitive biases that you have. But again, it impacts marketing because it's so important.
It's interesting because one of the reasons you're on the show, I mean, you're obviously an expert, you're great, and it's been a super interesting episode. But to an extent, you ended up here because of the availability bias, right? Because I was looking through the Brighton SEO, speakers, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting topic. Oh, who is Sarah, right? So I looked up Sarah. Like, you were available, and guess what? Brighton SEO, they're certainly out there, right? They've been around for a while. So, like, you already had the, we can call it the halo effect, right? Like, they already endorsed you. So I'm like, okay, must be a good speaker. I'll check you out. Your website, everything looks great, right? And I got you on the show. So it's kind of the same concept to get people in the door. Maybe really quickly here, like in a minute, tell us, like, what are some other psychological things that should be top of mind for marketers? I mean, it sounds like it's getting harder and harder to do good content and marketing.
Oh gosh, there are so many different psychological things that impact marketing. I'll be honest with you. Like, I never ever thought that, studying psychology and doing a degree in psychology would have so much to do with marketing and SEO. But it really does. And I think, it impacts things, for example, like pricing. Because an example that I gave in a previous talk was things like anchoring bias. And anchoring bias is where people tend to, place more value on the first bit of information that they've seen. So, for example, you could have two teddy bears, and both of the teddy bears would be sold for 4.99. But because you had one that had, 5.99 or was 5.99, now 4.99, people will buy the 4.99 teddy bear, whereas before they'd be like, oh no, this is too expensive. That sort of thing. And Apple does this really well there. For example, they put when it comes to marketing their iPhones, they put a really, really expensive iPhone as kind of their first price, so that you keep thinking of, iPhones as costing, I'm trying to work this out in dollars because I live in the Czech Republic, so everything's in Czech crowns. But say that they have an iPhone that is worth, say, just over $1,000.
Yeah.
And then when you go down all the different the different versions of the iPhone, and then you get down to one that costs $500, because the first one that you saw was like over $1,000. You're like, oh my gosh, $500, that's an absolute bargain. I'm going to buy it. Even though $500 for like a mobile phone is still quite expensive. So you've got things like that, like so many different things as well. For example, when you're doing with e-shops, another one that I talked about was, for example, the mere exposure effect. And this cognitive bias, has quite a big impact on impulse buying. So making sure that you always kind of recommend, you know, similar products once you've added something to your basket, so that you can go and buy and add more, because you'll think, oh, I've just bought this lipstick. Oh my gosh, I totally need this powder or this eyeshadow because it's been recommended to me.
Yeah. Awesome discussion, Sarah. Really appreciate you coming on the show. Ian, thanks for joining us. Thanks for your question. Maybe Sarah can get to that in the comments. We're out of time here because we still run on dbtv.tv every morning. Check us out there. Sarah, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review the Business Storytelling Show on your favorite podcast platform, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.